Yeah? Okay. So let's start. Okay, wonderful. So thank you to everybody who is here, and thank you to everybody who's going to trickle in as soon as they hear my voice. I'm Ilan Berman. I'm the Senior Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council in Washington, D.C. We've had the pleasure of hosting most of you, or a great many of you, at our institute in Washington. And in my role at the American Foreign Policy Council, I oversee all of our institutional research and analysis. So I've spent quite a few years looking at this precise topic, the role that think tanks can play and the contributions concretely that think tanks can make to the policymaking process. And to me, this is one of the most fascinating topics relating to emerging regions that are improving in connectivity, regions that are trying to upgrade their international standing and their connections with other regions, with their neighbors. So I'm really excited to oversee this panel. If you'll indulge me, I'll introduce all of our speakers. We have 3 speakers who are here in person, 1 speaker who is joining us virtually. Welcome. And I'll introduce each of them. And then I have a series of questions that I'd like to pose to the speakers. They all have enormous experience, extensive knowledge of the topic. I wanted this to be a dynamic conversation in which we walk through all of the permutations about how to upgrade think tanking and think tank thinking in the CAMCA region. So let me start by introducing Ambassador Norov. Ambassador Vladimir Norov is currently the CEO and founder of Silk Road Advisory, a consulting group based in Uzbekistan. He's had a long and distinguished career in public service and diplomacy, including serving as Uzbekistan's Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2006 to 2010. In 2019, Ambassador Norov was appointed Secretary General of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is when I met him. And he held that position until 2021. But quite literally, the number of government posts he has had are more numerous to list in anything resembling a brief period of time. But he has extensive experience in the interplay of policy and policy making. So I look forward to hearing from him. Next is Mr. Tengiz Pkhaladze, excuse me, is a non-resident senior fellow at the European Center for International Political Economy in Brussels. He's also an associate professor at the Georgian Institute of Public Relations. He's a member of the CAMCA network from Georgia. Dr. Fariz Ismailzade is Vice-rector for External Government and Student Affairs at Azerbaijan's ADA University, which he's been with since 2006. A widely renowned expert on political affairs in Central Asia and the Caucasus, he has done research at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, as well as at the Azerbaijani Embassy to the United States. And joining us virtually is Dr. Roman Vakulchuk, who is head of the Climate and Energy Research Group at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, a foreign policy think tank in Oslo, Norway. He holds a PhD in economics from Jacobs University, Bremen, and has consulted for more than 30 international organizations, including the Asian Development Bank, the OECD, and the World Bank. He's a CAMCA network member from Kazakhstan. So welcome to all of you. Let me start. I really don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I'm interested in navigating our way through this topic. So I think a very logical place to start, and let me start with you, Ambassador Norov, and then maybe Fariz can jump in, and then we'll move to the strictly think tank community members of the panel. But I'm really curious about this idea of information and analysis consumers and information and analysis producers. Governments are consumers of information. What we say in Washington is that ideas begin in very few places, surprisingly few places, and that's where the value of think tanks comes in advancing new ideas and new thinking. So, Ambassador Norov, can you talk a little bit about how during your government service you relied on think tanks, and also how you worked inside the government to develop that sort of analysis?
I think it is clear. Well, can you? Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel.
I will say you honestly, in 2017, when I returned from Brussels, finishing my mission at the head of diplomatic mission of Uzbekistan in EU, NATO, and Benelux, it was proposed me by President to head the Uzbekistan Institute of Strategic and Interregional Study under the President of Uzbekistan. For me, it was a big surprise because I never considered myself that I can be the head of think tanks. But nevertheless, it was interesting. When I came, I found that it was closed institution, not website, not any publications, not any magazine, and at the same time, not in social networks. It was not easy for me to transform the mind of this this analytical specialist. Then they answered me that it is qualified information and how it will be dangerous for interest of Uzbekistan if we will place some information in website. But now this website is functioning and in social networks. And at the same time, in some Pennsylvania University make some assess criteria of the think tanks of Central Asian think tanks. In this criteria, we were not. This institute were not among them. And KISI, Kazakh Institute, was on the high top level among the Central Asian think tanks. But at the same time, we began to make journal and events cooperation. Why? Because in Uzbekistan, it is analytics existed not for critical analysis of current events and the development of new proposal, but rather to confirm and consolidate the country's established political and economic course. Yeah, and with the coming to power Shavkat Mirziyoyev, it is completely made different way. It is drastically changed. And what is a pity that in 2015, Ministry of Higher Education closed in all universities, where in this time more than 60 universities, any political studies. So it was in 2017, closed all cathedrals of faculties and at the same time closed council for doctorate degree on political studies. And that's why he firstly made special decision by this decision in University of World Diplomacy and Economy. It was opened a special faculty and department, and now in 8 universities, it began today to train the specialists, the young specialists who capable for critical analysis and prepared some collecting information, data, facts, and make some logical analysis and propose some ideas. And in framework of this university, opened special think tanks for international studies, for European studies, for security, for environment. And at the same time, today, 8 universities in Uzbekistan preparing special specialists in this area. Now this situation is, in this time, it is before 17, it was not allowed to open independent think tanks. And after this degree, which adopted by President, for example, such first independent such think tanks organized by Bakhtiar Ergashev, well known here among our experts, opened during 2 days, opened Mano, such named his think tanks. And now this focused on some political analysis and commercial analysis. And they doing good job, but they are not so much. It is so small number because there is main problem for them. It is first of all financing. Second, it is staffing problem. It is the same till now. I worked in the 2 years, perhaps 2 years, as the director of Institute for Strategic Studying, Interregional, and under the president. And I can say that there was problem with the staff because president demanded more deeper analysis, more critical. There was a more proposal for reforming economy, for rising foreign cooperation of Uzbekistan, and in all fields where after the isolation, self-isolation previous and stagnation. So this, as he announced, the main priority of foreign policy, Central Asia, And that's why it is more focus was on analysis of the recent situation in Central Asia, the problem acute together. That's why he initiated in 2021 opening the Institute for International Institute for Central Asia, which is focused on cooperation with the Central Asian think tanks. In 2018, I initiated to organize first forum of think tanks of Central Asia. We organized the first session in Tashkent, second in my city town, Bukhara, to make this attractive. And our think tanks, when came, they could make the big potential of our region, not only it is for Uzbekistan. That's why today, in the political leadership of Uzbekistan and in the government of Uzbekistan, it is big demand for critical analysis and with some objective proposal for decision which will directed for improving situation in Uzbekistan and deepening process of reform. And in strategy of development Uzbekistan to 2026 till 2000, it is more put forward some ideas for deepening process of liberalization of economy and the deepening process of democracy in Uzbekistan. And at the same time, new constitution after referendum, which is adopted, there are new more norms included for protecting human rights, for developing first time civil society in Uzbekistan, developing in Uzbekistan, there is mentioned gender equality, a lot of such new norms which directed for modernization, liberalization, and deepening the democratic process. But it is needed some analytical assessment and so on. That's why it is important for us such cooperation between our Central Asian countries, think tanks, and think tanks. They it is today one of when it is body opened, when mutual trust rises and cooperation began more active on all levels, not only on political leadership level, but on the interregional level. Today, big demand on among political allies and ordinary people for regional identity. Because after independence, more we focused on national identity. It is normal process. But at the same time, for regional identity, it began, now demand is big. We talked it with the KC in January when they invited. Then in February in Dushanbe, when our colleagues invited there for conference. It is now in focus our think tanks because we need to prepare some deep analysis. Our institute prepared some conception. We proposed to organize some conference and common future for Central Asia on this agenda. Because some who are not interested for integration in Central Asia try to divide us. And the identity became one of good tools in this way. But if we look into the history of Central Asia, it is never war, there was supra nationality such, never one connected with some nationality. It was common area only from the birth, city of birth, Al-Bukhari, Al-Fergani, Al-Farabi, Al-Khajandi, or some others. So that's why we now, important for us, it is first of all, think tanks of Central Asia should make a tremendous effort to formulate this common history and to take out some mythology which is we had. In other such issues, we last year had in the Samarkand the summit of Turkish-speaking nation. But in Central Asia, it is Persian-speaking nation. This is Tajiks. For example, I am from Bukhara and I'm talking every day in two languages, Uzbek and Tajiks. For me, it is But at the same time, if we're looking to the history, lingua franca, this is language for communication in history was Sakdian, and then it was Persian language or Chagatai language. Last 100 years, certainly Russian language became. But now it is we last year organized it in our institute, Central Asian Institute, conference Kazakh-Uzbek relationship. And there was some statement from our scientists in beginning 20th centuries in Tashkent, in schools, madrasas, studied in 2 languages, Uzbek and the Persian languages, Tajik language. After revolution, Russian language began dominate, and other national languages began reduce it. Tajik disappeared. But now is certainly we see this identity with Turkish-speaking nation of Central Asia and Tajikistan very close. And with Azerbaijan, it's the same. Azerbaijan is the same was, if we're looking to history, Nizami Gencevi, he wrote mostly in Farsi, in Persian language, but it was the same before Alisher Navai, our poet. All Turkish-speaking poets wrote in Farsi, but then he was transformed from Tajik. If it was 9th, 10th century Gencevi, but Alisher Navai in 15th century lived. But we looking here, look at to the Nizami and Jami as here masters. Abai, great Kazakh poet. He wrote about importance of Nizami, of Firdausi, and so on. You're looking, this is why it is important task. In my view, think tanks should focus on these issues.
Right.
And second important, now is we talk today about transport corridor. It is important. I'm repeating everywhere. When I worked as ambassador in Holland, Amsterdam, 12th century, some small village. In 15th century, they competing world leadership in sea with the Britain. But in 12th centuries, Bukhara, Samarkand, Khojan, or Meller, and on Fergana Valley, it is flourishing because Silk Road based on the camels. Today, is history coming back? That's why I founded this company, Silk Road Advisory, because I know that Silk Road give impetus to developing our countries. That's why it is important to establish such partnership. I talked with Mamuka about that. I here supported this idea to organize such first forum, Central Asia and South Caucasus think tanks. It is a lot of issues we should discuss. I didn't receive an answer at my question, how it will be possible or not to connect or cohesion, some one belt, one road, and the global gate for benefit of Caspian and South Caucasian countries and Central Asia for developing this route. And again, come back to this about Silk Road, glorious part of history of Central Asia. Mr. Frederick Starr wrote about it. We were very thankful for him, who reminded as I told yesterday, there are many politicians give less interest to geography as a military man, for example. But nevertheless, think tanks, it is important. And that's why another issue, which is very urgent need for Central Asian countries, sinology. China is growing presence of China in Central Asia. We make analysis last month, especially in our institute, how it is developing sinology in our countries. Very low. If it was previously for special center for studying Uyghur and history and culture, it is reduced only studying China linguistic language and so on. But we need specialists. We have not specialists for American studying. We have not specialists for European studying. We have not enough specialists. That's why it is important task. This is, for example, I will tell you what said Mr. Xi Jinping. How he said in the summit that somewhere I put it. He said, China emphasized the world needs a prosperous Central Asia. That dynamically developing Central Asia not only meets the aspiration of the peoples of the region for a wonderful life, but will also give a powerful impetus to the restoration of the old economy. No one has the right to create discord and even confrontation in the region, much less to lay claim to selfish political interests. It is an interesting statement, yes? The same statement proves made in the summit EU Central Asia in communique adopted on the end of the summit in Cholpanata, the same, that sovereignty, territorial integrity in Central Asia should be kept. That's why it is important developing the centers of sinology in our countries. But it is needed another problem, which is now facing our think tanks, I think not only in Uzbekistan, but worldwide, with the developing artificial intelligence. It is what is important.
Before we go there, though,
Thank you.
No, that was wonderful, and you actually, I think, prefigured a number of my questions. We're covering the horizon, but where you started, I want to pick up on that and ask Fariz the idea of professionalization, the idea of building cadres that know how to access this knowledge community as the region develops. Fariz, you're at a university, and it's a university that is a finishing school for people who will go into government service, not only, but very significantly. And I'm curious as to how do you train them? How do you educate them to fully exploit this private sector as it's emerging? How do you get them to be smarter about geopolitics that Ambassador Norov talked about, but also how do you get them to be sort of less closed and more open to ideas from the outside?
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. About the think tanks activities in the region, I would like to make 3 points, short points. First is very difficult to catch the attention of policymakers. These days, with the social media, with so much information flow on different channels of information, WhatsApp, emails, whatever, it's very difficult to catch the attention of policymakers for very specific policy problems and very specific policy recommendations. In our university, in our research centers, we publish certain policy recommendations about very important issues. For example, recently we published a very important policy paper about Caspian security, Caspian maritime security. And we sent it to different government offices, and very difficult to get response. So the challenge number one is how to get attention of policymakers who are running around, very busy, don't have time to read even 3 pages or 4 pages. And I think this situation is very different from 1990s, when policymakers actually did read certain executive documents. But these days, no one is reading except Twitter. Everyone is just reading short Twitter. The second challenge, and this relates to your question, how to cultivate young researchers who can write in a brief manner and target their messages to the policymakers. Unfortunately, most of our universities still focus on long academic papers, and it is very difficult to get young researchers who are policy oriented. So we are trying to create extra workshops or do extra workshops to retrain master students how to make them focused on policy papers, policy briefs, because otherwise they just write very long and boring pieces of analysis. And third issue is, of course, issue of funding, because in our part of the world, there is no tradition of getting private sector to fund think tanks. And most of the think tanks get funding either from government or from international foundations, and this brings political affiliation. So how to make sure that our think tanks are independent, they have independent sources of funding, and how to make sure we draw private sector into this. These are the 3 challenges that we are facing, at least in Azerbaijan. I don't know about other countries.
No, thank you for that. And so that's a very natural segue to the question I want to ask to Tengiz and to Roman, because you guys are on the other side of the fence, my side of the fence, the policy producer, right? So ADA does that as well, but in a purely think tank capacity. I'm curious because the regional experience and the European and the American experience are very different, but what are the ways that you guys are impacting policy? How do you get the policy analysis, the information, how do you get it into the bloodstream for policymakers? Because for, at least in Washington, that for us, that is the measure of success. How much our ideas are accepted, how much our ideas begin to circulate in government. So the same question for both of you, but let me start with Tengiz.
Thank you so much. I think that's a very good question, because this is the main challenges for us.
Hold up the
this connectivity. We spoke a lot about connectivity. this is also a question about connectivity between the think tank, academia, and policymakers. Yeah, and if you succeed, then you have better decision when they doubt that. So, Ilan, you're absolutely right. That's a but different culture of cooperation with think tanks. And when it comes to Brussels or United States, and you can't compare situation in CAMCA region. Even I would say that legislation is different because think tank and non-governmental organization legally are treated in the same way. So, which you agree it's completely different. So mainly that depends on how much politicians are interested in critical thinking and independent assessments. Because think tank, so mainly this is 3 dimensions. Yeah, this is the research, that's assessment, and recommendation. Considering the current situation, politicians mainly are interested in research because as soon as they see assessment different from their opinion, of course they are not interested in recommendations. Yeah. So, and then research, that's a huge competition because research done by think tanks, by academia, by international organizations, World Bank, and so on. So, I mean, the main question is analysis of this big data. And then we come to another problem, which already was mentioned, but I really want to highlight that, how to make smart product. We are in very dynamic world. So nobody reads, though we are producing a lot of papers and so on, but nobody invests time or spend or waste time, name it as you like, to spend a week and read papers like that. So how to put the information and the main message in just sometimes that's about 1 page. 3 pages, no more. Nobody reads more. Yeah, so, and that, in that dimension, the classical way of operation of think tanks has been changed. And another thing is, let's say, non-academic education, which has becoming more and more important. Because when we have trainings for government officials or journalists and so on, this is also a challenge to produce smart product, because you can teach in traditional way according to the textbooks and so on. You have just day, 2, maximum a week to get people in the mainstream to ask right question and so on, so on, so on. And my last point is, as we are talking about policy, I mean, stakeholders are different, not only politicians are stakeholders. Quite different situation we have when it comes to the business. Because business is interested in critical thinking. So, and though they have their assessment instruments and tools and so on, but I remember all the time when they see political turbulences in our region or political issues, they immediately ask for the political risk assessment. I will stop here.
Okay, no, that's great. So, Roman, same question to you. From your perch, from your experience, how do you get things into the policy bloodstream? How do you influence? How do you impact? How do you bring your product to the consumer?
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's a very important question. And the reason why I can say that sometimes seems that in many cases, those stakeholders that are independent of users and consumers of the information, they are basically have common education Second, I think the think tanks, the credit for planning policy. There's one there's a need so first now and first the very investigation of
No, thank you, and I think this has been really useful in terms of contextualizing both the problems that exist in emerging, increasingly connected regions, and also the different problems that exist in areas like Europe, like the United States, where the think tank culture is established, but we have to find different modes of bringing information to those consumers. So let me do this because I was sort of thinking about what each of you has said, and it's sort of just a couple of thoughts that have sort of crystallized for me, and I'd love to hear your comments on all of them, starting with you, Ambassador Norov. But to me, what we're looking at in the context of Central Asia in particular are three separate things, right? And you flagged them sort of in passing in your comments. The first is the liberalization of society and how the society, especially in places like Uzbekistan, as the society is liberalizing and expanding, the room for free thought, the room for critical thought that may not comport with what the government is doing, that may be critical, is more accepted. This is a trend, frankly, that we've had in the United States and in Europe for a long time, but less so in Central Asia. And it's, I think, a very important and very useful development. The second is the connectivity question. You mentioned the Belt and Road. You mentioned sort of, increasing, the increasing focus on the region as a whole. And I think that is an important intellectual opportunity as well. an opportunity that as the neighbors begin to talk to each other more and more, there's an opportunity for policy institutes to interact, not only locally, among neighboring countries, but even beyond, right? As the context of cooperation extra-regionally, partnerships with think tanks in Europe, partnerships with think tanks in the United States becomes more and more feasible, and frankly, I would argue more and more desirable. And the third is something that you alluded to in passing, is the question of look, I'm American, so for us, the foreign policy conversation these days begins and ends with great power competition, begins and ends with China. And this is a region that is sort of in the cockpit of the competition. You see all the sides. You have to take great care not to be subsumed by one side or another to navigate the currents of this long-term strategic competition. And the think tanks, I think, play a very important role in this, in helping to explain Chinese strategic culture, explain American strategic interests, and all that. So I think to each of you, sort of the common question, starting with you, Ambassador Norov, how do you see that? How do you see it playing out? What's the next phase here that you see the think tank community in Central Asia? Where can it go? How should it improve?
Thank you very much for your questions. It is important rising capacity of think tanks of Central Asian countries, in particular Uzbekistan, for me as I work it, and now deep situation and big demand from our policymakers for critical analysis in all directions, which you mentioned. And that's why I said about another such challenge like artificial intelligence. And now is more information about that there will be, for example, 300 million reductions of labor places for high-level specialists. The same, how we should be ethics, looking how to issue of ethics rising, and so a lot of. But at the same time, there are some experts assessing that it is needed adjustment of think tanks to this new reality, the fourth technological revolution and advanced technologies and big data and so on, and we should know. But that's why you rightly said that our think tanks should have an experience and change this experience with their with the colleagues from other countries. For example, all think tanks in Central Asian countries appeared after independence, only by decision the governments, and there needed some ecosystem for independent think tanks developing. That's why I asked this ChatGPT, what kind of cooperation will be between Central Asian think tanks in Uzbekistan, particular with the American United States think tanks. And they are very pragmatic, about which I thought, about which we talked with you in 2018, if you remember, when I was director of Institute of Strategical Studying and visited Washington. And therefore, organize an exchange of experience between think tanks in Central Asia and the United States. This will allow specialists from Central Asia to gain experience working in American think tanks and familiarize themselves with the advanced methods of analysis and research, for example, through webinars and conference. Second, conduct joint projects and research. Joint projects and research will help specialists from Central Asia gain experience of working in international team and improve their skills. Third, organize training seminars and courses. American think tanks can hold training seminars and courses for Central Asia to share their experience and knowledge. And fourth, create an internship program. American think tanks can create an internship program for students and young professionals from Central Asia, which will allow them to gain practical work experience in American think tanks. It is proposal of ChatGPT. Okay, very, very useful. And at the same time, what I can say, we focus it. When I work at an Institute of Strategic Study, we established a special club of young analysts. Some of them now working in administration of president and other ministers. And now the same first when I was director in Institute of Central Asia, organized a special online and offline training seminars for students from fifth universities. So it is interest among our students and our young generation is very high for to obtain skills in critical analysis. And because it's rightly said, Roman, that now is business in big demand for such analysis, for a very objective, where analyzing of risk and advantages of cooperating with some country. When I visited as a director of Institute of Strategic Studies, Shanghai, there was a conference of think tanks, of Chinese think tanks. And when I talked with some their leadership, some think tanks, they said today we have transformation in Chinese think tanks. If before every tried to work in state think tanks, now they would like to work in independent think tanks because big corporations, Chinese corporations, they investing for this because they would like to advantage the market of other countries in Europe or America or Africa or anywhere. And they would like to know the risk, challenges and opportunities. That's why is from business in our countries, the same is rising. When I was minister last year in November, I participated in New York in C5+1 ministerial meeting. I proposed it in my statement. It should be established such the same format of cooperation, Central Asia +1 plus United States, such between our think tanks, such cooperation. We should organize. It is one of them. We can say today conference. It is one of the example of them. But we should make it formalize and do it on permanent level. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's great. So Fariz, to you, as the bridging mechanism between sort of government and academia, how do you see the scene evolving? You talked in your comments earlier. You talked about changing media, changing sort of patterns of consumption. But how are you preparing your students, your professionals, to go in and to excel and to really exploit this changing environment as much as possible?
Yeah. Well, in 1990s, when we became independent, the government had very little tolerance towards think tanks and NGOs and sort of non-governmental actors. And these cultures started slowly to change. Today, I think most government officials understand that the world is a very complicated place and that they need information, and that sometimes this information is available only at think tanks or NGOs, that maybe the government officials themselves don't have enough capacity or staff or resources to analyze certain topics. Some of the topics are very specific topics, for example, cybersecurity, or for example, some renewable energy issues. These are trendy issues that maybe government officials don't have enough researchers, so they have to outsource it to think tanks or independent research centers. So there is a general acceptance of think tanks. There's a general understanding that independent think tanks can do some positive role and positive participation. And here, I think think tanks also have a lot of opportunities related to internet. Internet opens up opportunities for collaboration across the borders. So for example, 1990s, we didn't have much chance, let's say, to communicate with our colleagues in Central Asia. But nowadays, everything is inside of your phone. You can send a message, you can send a paper, you can exchange an idea very quickly. So internet has opened up, and social media has opened up a lot of opportunities for internationalization, international collaboration. And also, internet opened opportunities for publicity. So whatever we do, we can easily publicize. We can put our reports, we can put our materials, research, analysis on internet. And those think tanks that are good in social media, they are popular, they get funding, they get exposure, they get visibility. So social media has become very important part of policy analysis as well, and policy recommendations as well. Maybe some think tanks write very good reports, but they're not able to market it very well to the society. And to your question, yes, there are opportunities for young students and young researchers to participate in all of these processes. I have seen some young master students who are showing interest. They are writing some stuff in social media, so I'm inviting them, come and be part of our research centers. So this is how, like, everything is evolving around internet, and internet opens up new opportunities for internationalization, for international cooperation, and for finding new talents. Thank you.
No, I think that's a very important point. And the thing that I would add, although advisedly, I may be a little bit skeptical of ChatGPT, and the recommendations that they gave are good. I'm just nervous about the technology over the long term. But this idea of regional expertise that you can pull out of the region through international collaboration, whether it's through the internet or through some other means, this idea of fellowships, internships, bringing scholars. So Tengiz and Rahman, to you guys, as people who work at think tanks in regions that need to know more about Central Asia, right? I work at a think tank that also needs to know. We have the best experts on Central Asia. We can always learn more. And I think it's true in think tanks that are not based in the region as well. How do we exploit that expertise that is being developed in the region, right? As the region connects, as the region becomes more dynamic, how do we pull that information out so that our policymakers can make better decisions, so they can understand the region better? So, Tengiz.
Yeah, that's definitely a question, how to improve our cooperation. Because, you know, that's very interesting dynamic when it comes to the cooperation between countries neighboring to each other. The cooperation is more intensive, but when it comes to the wider region, I wouldn't say that we are successful in that way. However, this is the challenge. And, you know, we live in consumer society. So this is the market. This is the policy market. And our goal is to offer something to those people, those consumers, and have good product for that market. So even during those 2 days, I heard number of questions about connectivity, capacity of this East-West corridor, and so on and so on. And we have more questions than answers. So this is avenue for cooperation for think tanks, right? So, and despite the fact that governments are interesting or not, are politicians dedicated and they are cooperative or not? Once again, stakeholders are different. Stakeholders are different, and we have to be more competitive. And another thing is, today, maybe it sounds a little bit strange, but sometimes perception matters more than facts. That's paradox of 21st century. And we have to consider that think tankers are also contributing in public opinion making. That's very important. So when we are talking about even the region, first of all, this is that understanding that is new opportunity for cooperation. This is our task to deliver and explain what it's about. So today perception matters. We are perception makers. And that's why it's very important to have strong cooperation.
No, I think that's a crucial point. So, Rahman, I want to sort of to get your view on what Tengiz said. What is the optimal way to pull out, to change the perceptions, to get Western policymakers smarter about this region and get them to, right? Because explaining the world, explaining the region is a very important part of formulating better policy. You have to understand it in order to be able to navigate. So how do we exploit this emerging connectivity in Central Asia better at our think tanks in the West? And not only regionally, right? In the sense that the Central Asian perspectives on China, you know, because of geographic proximity, because of cultural proximity, may be different, may have new and important insights that we in the West don't have, or are not as attuned to. So it becomes, I think, very important. So let's do this because we have a few minutes remaining. If the audience has any questions, I think there's somebody in the back. Julia has a mic. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Sir?
Thank you very much, dear speakers. Hi, Roman, good to see you, at least online. I represent Free the Habit Foundation. We are a think tank, operating globally in more than 100 countries. Well, the part of the job we do in Uzbekistan here, I can just only agree to what already Ambassador Norov has mentioned, and colleagues and Raman also on the issues. I just want to add one thing here, is that something that locally the people approach us when they approach me also personally, they ask for some kind of local expertise, or at least the expertise in the local language, because there's so many. The literature is usually in English, and I know from my personal experience that public in Uzbekistan, well, at least to receive the information about what think tank is and how they operate and so on, they need this information in Uzbek. And I actually wrote a piece in Uzbek and explain how think tanks should operate. So we just start from the grassroots, really. Then another thing, which could be an issue here is a good quality data usually is not there. You know, the one issue that the human potential, the capacity, and then the people who want really to engage with think tanks and work for them is one thing, because you know, when you comment on any political economic issues internally or externally, this is kind of the interpretation of that could be really very wide. And then, you know, this could be even considered as your personal engagement in politics, which is not true. You know, the job of think tank is a completely different thing. Yeah. And therefore, this could be something then to consider also locally, to explain what is, you know, just simply policy analysis is and public policy is just sometimes translated incorrectly in Russia, and then and it's kind of raise a concern on the local actors sometimes of that you were engaged in politics, but policy is different from politics, but in Russian it's kind of sometimes the same. So more explanation is needed. This is my point. Better quality data is needed, and this is very well corresponds to what Ambassador Norov mentioned about the big data and more advanced research, and to use the good quality data. I haven't mentioned that, for example, in a previous session about transportation corridors, but there's a bunch of very good quality research explaining the economic impacts from the transportation corridors that are usually not mentioned. We're just talking about geopolitics in general, but what about the local impact on that? So, you know, there's so many issues. And honestly, what our approach is, and this is my last point that in my comment, is to actually raise the local expertise, not only just through the exchange, you know, of the Central Asian or Caucasian experts going to the US or to Europe and so on, but actually to raise the local expertise by supporting also or building capacity of the human potential, the experts in the countries. Because this is something which will stay then in the country, most likely. And this is something that the countries are needed in the area of think tanks.
Good morning. Oh, good afternoon. Thank you, speakers. I really enjoyed most of the cases you described and situation. I'm Nadira Muhammadkulova. I'm a Ramsar Fellow also. And just less than 1 year ago, I joined a think tank, recently established think tank in Tashkent. And I was so impressed when I visited the Heritage Foundation in USA. So I was thinking about, joining, or it was a sort of dream to establish my own think tank, but I didn't know how it worked. And in Uzbekistan, unfortunately, most of the, I would say all the think tanks, they're pro-governmental. They're not independent at all. And most of them are not business oriented, or they are working on the base of governmental requests and demand, and that makes them very vulnerable, and they are financially unstable. So they cannot earn money because they work for the government. Government usually doesn't pay. So to find funds, they need to write something that would be interesting or even maybe critical, so donors would be interested in investing, in giving them some grants or funds. And here, in Uzbekistan, we don't have this kind of culture as in USA, like a private sponsorship or donating money. In the Heritage Foundation, they said that they have more than 500,000 donations per year. Even $5 from a farmer in Texas can be something important for the think tank. But we don't have this kind of culture yet. So to change people's mindsets, to let them believe, or at least to let them know what is a think tank, classic think tank means, and what they are standing for, is quite important. We need to communicate on the ground, I think, to deliver this message that people and citizens, civil society can lobby some interesting things, or they can maybe even raise some issues, questions through the think tanks. And by creating this sort of trust and also sponsorship culture, we could make think tanks more independent, powerful, and politically powerful, in order to bring some serious ideas on the table when negotiating or when discussing some issues. And also what I really wanted to see in Uzbekistan, that some think tanks would be on the opposite side, and also delivering not only pro-governmental or interesting for government topics, but also something that is quite interesting for people in rural areas. And now it's mostly delivered by UNDP, UN agencies, or some international organizations. So they became sort of charity funds. They are trying to solve some issues, but government is mostly focused on different issues, like political or very serious. So I wish we could change behavior of our citizens in order to raise this culture of donating, of believing in some institutions like think tanks, to make them more independent. And also private sector, we need to deal with them. For example, we have a very well-known supermarkets, Korzinka. So if they are interested in expansion of their business, they could approach think tank and order or pay for some research, like a SWOT analysis. What if I want to start up or open up my business in a neighboring country, but there are some political risks, instability, or some logistics issue? So can you help us to assess what kind of risks we have, and etc. So I think that think tanks are capable to deliver this kind of research and analysis on the ground. But unfortunately, we don't have this kind of culture yet. As I said, I didn't see any kind of private sector who approached some research institutions. So I think that it would be great to communicate more in Uzbek. Oh, Bahram disappeared. So in Uzbek, in Russian, whatever language we choose, but to make it easy for people to understand what is a think tank and what they're standing for, what kind of activity they can deliver. That's it. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's wonderful. Are there any other comments or questions? So let me content myself with this, and then we can, we're standing between you and lunch, so it's a very dangerous place to stand. I think that comment is exactly right. I think you have to walk before you can run. So in the United States, you have a very developed think tank culture in which there are think tanks that receive grants or projects from the government. Many, like the Heritage Foundation, like the American Foreign Policy Council, where I work, we rely on private donations. There's a by the way, a separate conversation that the region is not yet having, but will have to have as the think tank community develops, which is foreign funding and the corrupting effect of foreign funding. Because, as you have countries, as close to here as China, as far away as Qatar, have very established records of shaping research through funding programs, through funding projects in ways that sometimes compromise the integrity of analysis. So you have to be very careful about accepting those funds. But fundamentally in the United States, the value proposition of think tanks is that donors know that by supporting think tanks, they can impact the policy process. They know that policymakers pay attention to think tanks. They accept the advice that think tanks give. That is something that has not always been the case in Central Asia. It's emerging in Central Asia through this new opening of various governments, through the new, more tolerant approach to contrasting ideas. But as this develops, my sense is, as an observer from the outside, is there will be more opportunities for independent think tanks and for independent think tank funding, because the donors will be attracted to the idea that through these institutions, they can actually help to shape policy outcomes. So I'll end it there. Let me thank my panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. This was a wonderful session. Thank you. Please join me in thanking the panel.
Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to take part at the luncheon and lobby level at the restaurant, and we will reconvene at 13:30